Hello, everyone. I'm Anushka, and this is Love GMA. Welcome back to our Sheroes podcast. Today, we have someone very special with us.
Today we have with us Ms. Huma Khan, who is currently working with the United Nations. She's been posted in various countries like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Sudan, and now Bangladesh. We're very excited to have her today, and we've been waiting to invite her on our Shiro's podcast since June, I think. And I think that no intro will do enough justice to her. So I think let's dive right into the questions. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Huma. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Likewise, I'm happy to be with you.
So for our first question, we wanted to ask you that you grew up in Uttar Pradesh and now you're working for the UN. That's quite a remarkable journey and it's so inspiring. What was the journey like and what were some key life fundamentals that it taught you?
Started from a very small town, so I was not even from any big city. Faizabad is a small place. But I think more grounded you are, more life lessons you learn. So some of the things that I learned at that time, particularly with all the political atmosphere that India was going through, which was discrimination, hatred against a particular group, and oppression of those who were marginalized or who were, be it related to religion, be it related to caste, or be it related to gender. So my exposure to this was from early age, to see that there are people who are not treated equally. And I think the strongest motivation was to question that, to challenge that some people are better and some are less, be it based on any of their identities. So that's the lesson that I learned from there. And then, of course, living in a small town, I mean, English is also not a language that many people speak or study. So living there and then trying to learn outside the world. I mean, there are many different things. I remember when I went to the US for the first time, I had not used computers, so I had to register for special classes to learn how to use computer, because it was not very common. Again, it may have been common in India in bigger cities, but it was not common in ordinary schools and colleges. So it has always required extra work. So to be at par with everybody, you have to work harder, because you have not necessarily had all the privilege or education or skills that other people had, which makes you work harder and try to be ahead of yourself, in the sense to prepare. One big thing that I think in terms of advantages is coming from the grassroots, coming from a very regular grassroots atmosphere. You develop very good political skills. You know, your political instincts are pretty strong and instinctive, not necessarily that you read them in the books. Books, of course, have helped to analyze and elaborate, but you just grasp them from being part of the larger community. So that is the other thing that has helped me right through my work, is to be able to assess people, to have that strategic political instinct to know and understand who's who, what will work, what will not work, and to be a good negotiator, because the grassroots life is all about negotiating spaces.
Absolutely. I think that makes so much sense. And even for us, I mean, we've grown up in Dubai, but we're still so connected because we've gone to an Indian school, to our Indian roots, that sometimes when we look at things that happen, let's say in the US or their culture, it is a bit of a shock to us. And to go from Faizabad right to a university like Columbia in the US, it must have been quite a different atmosphere and quite a culture shock in many ways.
It's positive and negative both.
So, from all the countries that you've lived and worked in, what is one issue that plagues women? And how do you think, as young students who are about to graduate from high school and go into the real world, we can help improve and work for that issue?
I think discrimination and inequality remains across the world, and that is one issue that At least it bothers me a lot. So in a country where you see it manifested in terms of caste or gender or religion, but when you go to the Western countries or even in India, you see the class divide, and which is becoming so much stronger. So you see there are people who have too much, and then there are people who don't even have the basics. And more in the capitalist world, people have stopped caring about this very brutal inequality that our times have had, are having even more than our ancestors, because it's all about profit, and it's all about, you know, how much money somebody can make, and by all means, whether it's to destroy climate, whether it's to destroy other human beings' lives. And that is something that, no matter if a country is called developed or it's called developing or it's called underdeveloped, that's one issue of inequality that is across the world. And I think generations to come have to look at it as something that is damaging them, because often people think the ones who are accumulating all this wealth at the sake of climate, at the sake of other people's lives, believe that it's not hurting me, why do I care? But it's not true. It's hurting everybody, because in the end, the way we are destroying our environment, the way we are destroying the whole planet, it is impacting everybody. So I feel that it's time that we start talking about some checks and balances towards this very brazen kind of profit-making world that we have become, without almost any human values. It was really shocked that I read today that even now countries are blocking access of COVID vaccine to some of the poorer countries, because they want to hoard these vaccines for the richer nations who can pay more, or the companies who want to make profit. Who would think that in a time like this, when everybody really wants to get, I mean, COVID is a pandemic, and but even now, when people are thinking of this profit making, then obviously something has gone wrong with our world. Something has seriously gone wrong with our world, that we are not able to think, even in this time, that it's not all about profit. A vaccine is not a profit making thing. A vaccine is fundamentally designed to protect human life. Profit can be an added advantage for some, but the existence of vaccine is to protect people. So I feel that as the new generation comes in, what we have to really challenge is this brazen inequality and this greed that has gotten into human race, that we are not thinking beyond profit and beyond growth and beyond money. That is a value that we need to change, and we need to work back, because a good society is a society where people are also happy, healthy, and everybody has something to live. I'm sure that even if you live in a palace, you don't like that there are people outside on the street who don't even eat. I don't know if that makes someone living in a palace happy. And if it does, then the value system needs to change.
Absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, in this capitalist society, the class divide is just growing. The rich just sometimes they just keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer, and the gap's just widening, and it's almost a gulf at this point. And I think you're absolutely right. There's definitely been a decline in ethics and morals. And I think we're all just chasing after our own individual and selfish goals, that we're not stopping to look at the impact that some of our decisions are leaving on others. So I think you're absolutely right. I hope whoever is listening, especially if they're from our generation, we really pay heed to what ma'am just said, and that we try to return to some of our human values and consideration for other people. I think that's what's incredibly important. And I hope we start taking responsibility for our own actions instead of just doing things and thinking that there will be no consequences. I hope we own up to our actions and try to fix any wrongdoings that happen as a subsequent result.
Absolutely. I think even as teenagers, we don't think that it's going to come back and affect us. We think, oh, yeah, we're doing something. Yeah, okay, someone else will. Like, especially in the UAE, so many people casually throw, let's say, garbage around, and they know that, okay, at night, the sweepers will come and they'll take care of it. And I think that's exactly where problems like this start, from the very like beginning childhood mentality. So when you graduated high school and when you were going and looking into picking a career, of course, social work and being a social work activist, fighting for other people's rights was not a very lucrative field, especially at that time. Most parents looked into making their children doctors, engineers, or lawyers. So, why was it that you took to this field, and did you get support from your family? How was going into that field? Even today, when we think of, let's say, going into social work, we do have a few angry nods from our parents who say that, oh, how are you going to provide for yourself? And um, how are you going to sustain your lifestyle? So how is it for you when you started?
At that time, I think from very childhood, because my childhood was very, as I said, during the Babri Masjid demolition, that I lived in a town which was right there. So what all happened in terms of the wrong kind of politics and the wrong kind of, almost the social fabric changing into something which was full of hatred in a place where I had seen a lot of love and affection between people, but these things changing because of politics and then the oppression around me. I always wanted to do something to change this social structure which was based on caste and gender and religion. I was not, when I was growing up, I didn't know that there is a field that you can work professionally in social work. I just wanted to do these things. So I used to sometimes volunteer with people who were doing anything which they thought is good, which is either teaching in an orphanage or giving food to some poor or whatever people were doing to help others. I always tried to participate in that. And then when I started studying, I mean, political parties were another forum. You could also be part of, some of the political parties who wanted to, who always said that they are helping the poor. So you try. I tried with them and then also realized that it's not, it's a very superficial way. And then after election, everybody disappears and they don't sustain this kind of work. So when I was trying to select a career, somebody told me that there is a master's in social work, and law was something I was always interested in because again, that to me was a tool to justice. And I have a very strong belief in justice. Maybe it also comes from the faith, what the value system that I was taught at home with my grandparents and my parents. So law always interested me as a field. So I did my education and then I started looking. And my first opportunity came as a grassroots program when I went to work in Bundelkhand, Chitrakoot, which is a very remote area full of dacoits, much less developed. And not everybody wanted to, but my parents were respectful of what I chose to do always. So they were not very imposing. They were also not very ambitious. Like nowadays, even parents have ambition because they want to see their child here and there. At that time, when I was growing up, my parents were more like, if you're a good person and if you have a decent living, then they were okay. They were not very ambitious and not very materialistic in that sense. That materialism that now career is always has to translate into money. At that time, I think a respectful life with enough to survive was okay. And that time I was not paid much. I also lived in a very difficult place, so very small room for a couple of years. Then I started an NGO with some other colleagues from there, and we did not have funding. So there were years that one went without salary and just worked, sometimes as a consultant to sustain one's needs to establish the NGO. And so the choice was not an easy one, but from the very beginning, I realized because I enjoyed what I did. So when I started working for this community-based organization, I was so involved in it and my mind was always occupied and I really felt happy doing what I was doing. And that's what was the decisive factor that, okay, this is the profession that is for me and this is the type of work I would want to do. And since then, as I said, my parents were not very imposing. They had their reservations in the sense they wanted to have enough, me to have enough so that I sustain myself, but not beyond that. So in that sense, I was fortunate to have a supportive family. And then after that, I mean, life takes its own turn. So for many years, I worked not paid, mostly voluntary. I worked in Gujarat, which was also completely voluntary. I actually lived with people who were displaced during 2002 riots. So I basically just in the same colony where they were rehabilitated, I also lived with them. But those were the best times of my learning. So what I want to say here is that one should not get, and I see young people now get very flustered with these ideas. Oh, if there is no proper toilet, how can I go there and live there? Or if there is no running water. But I think when, especially when you're young and your health is good, you should not be worried about these things. These things are very, very small part of your learning. And if you expose yourself to bigger, if you want to expose yourself to the bigger risks, then don't tie yourself with these little things of, having a toilet and hot water and running water, because then you're trapped in this, and you never get to have exposure to the world, because then you only go to certain places, so your life remains very limited. In my case, I think I was fortunate because I had a lot of exposure. I remember once we did a Padyatra, which is this walking tour on violence against women during this 16 days campaign. From village to village, we just walked from one village to the other, doing street plays and talking to people, talking about violence against women in a region like Chitrakoot, where it was very common. I mean, many women died at the hands of their spouse and their families. So just engaging men and women in a conversation in every village, and whatever people gave us, we ate, slept in one village, started walking in the morning. But those were very happy times. Now, if you start thinking, oh God, where will I go? There's no toilet, there is no bathroom, there is no, then you will not have that exposure. So exposure comes with a bit of price and with a bit of openness. And as long as your health allows, I think one should take those risks and expose oneself. No place is perfect. So, and life is not perfect. So, unless you expose yourself to imperfections, you don't really know this world. And it's a beautiful world out there. You go to villages, people may not have much, but there you meet really people who are rich in their experience and who influence their lives. For example, with me, Bilkis always is someone who influenced my life. She was only 17 or 18 when she got raped, and then she's someone who stood strong to take that battle ahead. It took us, I don't know, 8 years or 9 years to have the first judgment, but she never blinked her eyelid. She had to, she was threatened, she had to move places. So you also meet in this exposure women and men who are very strong and who influence you for life. So that's one thing I wanted to say, that open yourself to the world. Don't restrict.
I think that makes so much sense because today, even college choices, we really restrict ourselves. We don't want to explore different countries where we don't really know much about the culture. A lot of us don't want to go and study in India because we think that, it won't be as comfortable or as luxurious as our life here. And it really makes us think how many opportunities we're missing out on because of these preconceived notions that we have.
I think it's also just a constant indicator of our privilege that if we're not willing to exit our little bubble and we only want to live in our little world, then we're never going to realize all the issues and the problems that exist outside. And if these small things are already posing such a big issue for us, then we should recognize how, lack of sanitary care or lack of clean water, how these are real issues for people outside, from outside our little bubble. And I think it's only when you have those experiences that you can truly understand the extent to how these issues affect others, and then only you can really work towards making a veritable change, because unless you know what those people are going through, you're never going to be able to work for them. So ma'am, you had mentioned right now someone who had inspired you, and we wanted to ask you, who do you think is your biggest role model and why?
I think for most girls, one of the role models is always your mother, in one way or the other. And that was the same for me. My mother was unique in the sense she was the first woman in her family who did her post graduation. She was the first woman in her family who worked and brought income to the house and contributed equally financially, which was not very common in my mother's generation. There were not many women who did that. And that part of her was always something that inspired, in the sense that you have to have your economic independence to be respected, because to be respected in your family, to be respected in your society, and to be a person of your own. She was also someone who liked reading a lot, and she encouraged us to read. That was the other thing that I learned from her. My grandmother, my nanny, she was someone who also was very inspiring. Was not educated. She lost her mother very young, and then she was married also at a very young age. But she was someone who really valued education. So I remember once I got my result, I don't know which class, and I was telling her about my marks. And she took my report card and she said, "You hold on to this because this is your key to freedom. Don't be like me. Your education is your key to the freedom." And she was a housewife. She had not traveled much. She did not, but she was very clear. She said, "Be like your mother and don't be like me, because this education is what is your key to freedom." So those two women, of course, in my life have had very strong influence. Having left the house, the home, and then meeting other people, I would also like to remember one person whose case I worked on when I was in Chitrakoot. It was a case of domestic violence. I mean, the woman had, I mean, the husband had hit her and broken her skull and everything. And um, she went through surgery, plastic surgery, as well as the head surgery in a government hospital. She came from a very poor family. She used to cook in other people's house. But again, her resilience, because everybody thought she would not survive, but she was so patient and resilient right through following the doctor's advice without ever complaining. And I remember, I mean, she went through a lot of pain and these surgeries are not easy. So you have one surgery, then you have to have the second one. And once I was talking to her and I said that I'm sorry that you have to go through so much. She said, "No, I'm very fortunate that I have the option to go through all this. I know not everybody would, so I really value my life. And I consider myself lucky to have the opportunity to live." And that tells you about the value of female life in our country, and at least parts of our country, and my country for sure, and certain class, and again the inequality that we are talking about. And then Bilkis was another person who really influenced me. She was a rape survivor, very young woman, and brutal. You can look up her story. It was a brutal story, but there are many brutal stories. What was inspiring about her that she was not broken, no matter how brutal the experience was. She was not broken as a person. She was a very strong person. She always stood by. I mean, no question, she wanted to go for legal battle. And she went through this for years and never once said that, "Oh, I don't want to do this," because there are many survivors. Because I've worked on a lot of cases, people also get tired, and rightfully so, because you don't have your income, you spend so much time, you have so many fears of what if this happens, that happens. But someone whose determination was just amazing. So I have always learned from people. I mean, I've learned from many, of course. You learn from your professors and teachers, but that everybody does, and that's not. But these women that I met recently when I worked in South Sudan, I was working on some cases of sexual slavery. So very young women, girls and boys who were abducted by an armed group. And then boys were forcibly recruited in the armed group. Some of the girls were, and some others were just assigned as sex slaves from a very young age. And they used to cook and clean and also provide sexual services. And when I started working, I used to go there trying to interview, and all these commanders and these men were there. So it was very hard to talk to them. And one of these girls, probably 16, and she was the bodyguard to one of the commanders. Beautiful woman with a beautiful smile, beautiful girl, not even a woman. And I remember talking to her. I took her aside at some point and she said, "Can you make me run away from here?" And I said, "Don't you fear?" She said, "Yeah, I mean, I have to take this chance. I want to live. I want to go to school. I want to go back to raising chicken. I really want to go to school. So can you just make me run away from here?" And After that, we had a lot of negotiations. We were able to sign some agreements with the group and to allow these women to leave. Quite a few of them have left, although not everyone, because these things are not simple. But many of them are now learning livelihood skills and trying to find life. But people who've been in the worst of circumstances with a smile on their face, and people who've been ready to fight, I think they are the real heroes in this world. I mean, much more than people who are educated and have the privilege. But those are many, and people who are intellectually capable and analytical. Those are skills you can learn in a university. But these are the skills that just life teaches you and makes you a beautiful person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing these stories with us. It was just really inspiring and also heart wrenching to hear about some of these stories. But you're very much right. I think only those who overcome adversity and don't let their circumstances bring them down, they're the real heroes, and they're really people who we can look up to as role models.
Talking about violence against women and the kind of atrocities that women still go through in certain countries, we often hear in today's world people say that there's no need for feminism. And when you say that you're a feminist, people think you're this overly aggressive person with a banner who just stands for women over men. Being having lived in these countries, having worked with these women, what are your views on this statement, and do you think that we do still need feminism in today's world?
Feminism to me is a way of life, and it's not about, it came to oppose a system in which systemically one gender was made more powerful and considered better than the other. So feminism opposed that very idea that any human being is better than the other. And that's the fundamental rule of feminism. So it's not only about gender, but it's also about race, it's about class, it's about um, caste in our context, or religion, or anything. So feminism is very much a thought based on equality, and it's not necessarily about men and women only. It also looks at power. So how is power placed in a certain context? And it can be also that in a particular context, a woman gets the same power and can be abusive towards other human beings, be it men or women. So feminism challenges the power models that our society has had, where some people automatically gain and then they are considered better, and then they start dictating what others should or should not do. And I feel that these power structures are even more stronger than before, or as at least equally strong at the moment. And then whoever is disadvantaged, and women are still largely disadvantaged because of historical marginalization that they have faced. So there are hardly any countries, maybe some of the Nordic countries, I cannot say, but rest of the world, women still remain disadvantaged in many ways. They don't necessarily always have equal opportunities. The world has not really found a way to deal with the childbearing and child rearing role of women. So often, when you reach, you may be very good in your career, and then when you have a child, everything falls up because you are the one who's responsible to take care of the child. And these are countries pay less to women in these situations. So the discrimination may have different forms in different places, but it remains. Feminism is also about a different model of power. And that model of power should keep everybody at equal level, and not only amongst genders, but also amongst caste, class, religion. And I feel that there is a long way to go if we talk about changing the power model, the leadership model of the world. Feminism is very much, I mean, if you're a feminist, you cannot be necessarily approving of capitalism, because it's again a power model that puts, some people above others. So feminism to me is much broader than just women over men or men over women. It challenges the gender roles in the sense that women are doing this and therefore they should be doing, you know, women are emotional and men are rational, for example. Many people still believe that, oh, women are emotional because they shed tears. But it doesn't mean that men who are shouting and fighting with each other are not being emotional and are being very rational. So I feel that it's a long way to go. I think the world has definitely made progress. We see many more women in public sphere, many more women, um, part of contributing to their societies and to the world. But I don't think that we are far from reaching equality. I mean, you also see there's so much of backlash in South Asian countries, in India, in Bangladesh, in all these countries. You also see that there are, a lot of negative things coming back. So a lot of violence increasing against women, because when you go out, you're not considered a good woman, and then rape cases are more. So I feel that we are far from reaching an evolved state. And feminism, I think, is a model that should stay, because it's not only about men and women, it's about powerful and powerless.
Absolutely. I think that really for everyone, and a lot of people came up to us as well and said that, why do you think such a campaign in school is needed? Don't you think that you have the kind of equality you need? And that's the kind of rationale that we gave everyone who came and asked us, that yes, we have equality, but isn't it our duty to help others and educate at least the students around us to go out and to be people who support others, people who look out to help those in less fortunate countries? um, and I think that really clears this one question up.
What advice would you like to give young girls who are passionate about helping society and creating a positive change?
I think one rule is to follow your heart. So do what you like to do and what you think is the right thing to do. Money, fame, don't start from there. That comes. Start from what you believe in and what you want to do, what you enjoy doing. If you start from the wrong side, what will get me fame, and then, or what will get me money, I think that's the wrong side of the spectrum. Start from what you like to do and what you enjoy doing. Because whatever you do, when you enjoy doing something, you do it well. And when you believe in something, you do it well. And then, of course, other things like money and fame and all, if you want that, that comes. But you have to be good at what you're doing. And only way to be good at what you're doing is to do what you like to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that advice. I think that was very, very appropriate for, especially I think social work. I think it's really important to find a cause that you're passionate about and work for it, and not just make it a tokenistic sort of initiative. So thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. It was an honor having you here and listening to your stories. It was honestly such an eye opener for me, and I'm sure it was for Nida as well.
Absolutely. It was such an enlightening conversation. I think today I can say that yes, I am privileged, and I think we realize now what kind of responsibility we have to help those around us who are less fortunate. And I personally feel like I've also learned that I should let go of these small reservations, like what will I eat, where will I sleep, just things like that.
Okay. All the best and thank you.
Thank you once again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.